Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 9 of Logicast, the AWS News Podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Karl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today by John, as always. As always. How are you doing today, John?
I can't complain on balance. I mean, I could, but I won't. The DIY chronicles continue. I had some doors off at the weekend, trimming the bottom of them, which is always a nightmare. But, not plumbing this time, which is different.
You didn't blow the bloody doors off, did you?
Chortle.
Well, if we're on the subject of DIY, yesterday I was stripping down a 30cc carburetor from my chainsaw tree lopper because the fueling was off, and I failed. But turns out that they're pretty cheap on eBay, so I've got a new one coming, and hopefully it's a direct swap replacement. But anyway, we're not here to talk about DIY.
We are sure. We seem to.
Well, we often do talk about DIY because that's what we do at the weekend. We work hard all week, and then we work hard all weekend, and come back to work for a rest. I think sometimes it feels like. But anyway, we must introduce our guest, and maybe he's been doing some DIY that he can tell us all about. But we are joined today by fellow AWS Community Builder Craig Johnson. How are you doing today, Craig?
Hey, pretty well. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. I'm good. As I said, back to work for a rest. Are you a big DIY man, or do you just tend to pay people to do those things?
No, I do a lot of the DIY. So we've got a tree that is pushing up against our fence. Our fence is leaning at a 45-degree angle. So I could pay the chainsaw people something like $1,100 to fix it, or I could rent the chainsaw myself and do it. So that is what I've been accomplishing this weekend. And while the tree is not pushed up against it anymore, the fence is still leaning at 45-degree angles. So either I have a root issue or something else there. So
you can't fix a lean with a chainsaw.
No, you can't. I mean, you can try.
Well, you can.
I mean, there's lots of problems. Lots of problems can be fixed with a chainsaw. So yeah.
So long as the fueling is right, unlike mine.
Just buy an electric one for crying.
That's true. No.
It's nowhere near as satisfying. When you pull the throttle on an electric one. You don't feel like quite so much of a man.
You must have seen that. Maybe it's just me that watches this because I'm sad. You must have seen the how long does it take to cut through a log, the other videos with an electric one and a chainsaw. And the electric one takes longer than the petrol one, sure, but they're not accounting for the time that the petrol engine has to sit there idling to warm up before you can use the bloody thing.
This is true.
Anyway, we're not here to talk about chainsaw fueling, but this is something I've been dealing with over the weekend. Craig, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you do for the AWS community, what you do for a living.
Yeah, sure. So I am AWS Community Builder coming up on year 3, assuming everything goes well there. But I'm also principal architect at Forward Networks. So my focus is on networking and content delivery. So most of my career has been on the on-prem side, work for companies like Cisco, on the SDN side, things like that. So last several years, I've been focusing most on cloud networking, specifically AWS networking. But most of mine is all the hardware stuff. So it's a fun, new, exciting world.
Cool. So is there a networking category in CBs? Are you in that category?
Yes, there's a networking content delivery category. Cool. So yeah.
I think that might make you the first guest.
No. Stephen Sonnet, because he was a CB when he came on, was networking and content delivery, and now he's a hero in community or some such. But he was networking and content delivery.
Okay, but it's not a category we've had on a lot. So potentially the second guest from the
you don't run into a lot of them.
Yeah,
it's a small knit community.
Yeah, niche. I mean, niche community.
You don't have to talk about the things that are in your category is for. I think people get kind of quite uppity about that. I mean, I'm serverless and I do a lot of serverless, but that's because it's a special interest. If you want to talk about databases, I don't think anyone's going to complain about it.
Not against the rules. Okay, fair enough.
Well, I think we are going to talk about databases, aren't we, today? Is that one of the...
Usually do.
Yeah, it usually comes into it somewhere. Cool. So really appreciate you joining us today, Craig. As regular listeners to the podcast will know, once a week I curate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John and I pick a set of the articles, which we agree with our guest ahead of time, that we'd like to talk about on the podcast. So we do, of course, have such a selection of articles this week. And the first one is from our friends over at InfoQ, who we regularly feature on the podcast. This one is all about how AWS has introduced centralized root access management for organizations. So we know that the root account is all-powerful God mode and should never be used ever after first setting it up. Amazing how many people we find that do not adhere to this best practice. But obviously, if you are a large organization and you've got hundreds, if not thousands of accounts, then managing those root users could be a challenge. So AWS has introduced this centralized root access management for organizations. John, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, this isn't particularly a new thing, I don't think. I don't know why they're saying it's new. It's something that's good. And the article that kind of goes into it does call out that AWS are kind of late to the party on this one. Azure and Google have been doing this for a little while. The feature's nice. I unless I'm missing something, this isn't net new. This was done a few months ago now, and you've got this kind of view of here's all the root account users, and you can turn them off centrally, which is kind of what you want to do. You also want to set SCPs so that you prevent them from doing anything, which again, you've been able to do that forever. Like we've done that in our landing zone product. That's not new in the slightest. So I'm not quite sure where this article's going with this, because I unless I'm missing something, none of this is new.
Well, it was done in November. So if you click through to the blog post,
Yeah, but the article's late February. That's not that new.
Yep, fair enough. Also not that old, so I think perhaps a little harsh, but yeah. And I don't think we've spoken about it before, have we?
Probably.
Okay. So, Craig, what are your thoughts on this? Is this a challenge you've faced on?
Yeah, it is. So, because what I've seen is, like you mentioned, John, the guidance has always been you have the root user and then hide the password, throw it away everywhere not used. And I get that. And it really kind of, in my opinion, shows somewhat the age and legacy of the IAM model itself, and that you still have these sort of constructs. And so being able to apply SCPs to it, if that's truly what it is, like I don't think you could apply SCPs to root accounts before.
You could. Not. Okay. Yeah. So you could apply SCPs, but they didn't affect the root user in the management account. Because you can't do anything to that user, and SCPs are kind of a bit hit and miss in the management account. But you could do them in member accounts.
Okay, so maybe this is just on an organization level, you can do it over that, something like that, and that makes a lot of sense. To kind of cover up a lot of their, they mentioned with, you have Active Directory entry and other things like that have these kind of a bit more advanced ones, and it does kind of bring them in line. So, yeah, I've seen a lot more guidance on, hiding those kind of root, and this is just a good way to do it. So I think it's a welcome addition, and any landing zone should have something like this in it.
Does our landing zone have something like this in it, John?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I mean, this is the functionality more generally. Let's park this article for a minute. The functionality more generally is long needed, right? So our landing zone offering has an SCP that applies to all member accounts that say, if the root user tries to do anything, it applies to all accounts, actually, we have an alarm that says, if the root user tries to do anything, tell us about it. And the member accounts, there's an SCP that says the root user is not allowed to do anything. Can't log in, can't do a damn thing. Brilliant. That is somewhat at odds with a number of monitoring tools for things like your ISO standards, because the standard is your root user must be, random password, 16 characters, alphanumeric, MFA must be set, and all this kind of thing, which those two things are kind of at odds, because you don't need to bother setting MFA if the user can't do anything.
Right.
So this is generally a welcome change, because it just rationalizes this functionality with reality. Because I mean, the size of organizations we deal with are like 10, 15 accounts tops, right? So it's viable whenever you vend an account. You do have to go through this bit of a hoopla of resetting the password because it doesn't have one. So you have to get it, and then you can log in and set MFA, and then you can lock it all away again. And that's okay for smaller organizations. But if you're vending thousands of accounts, which you could viably do, in large organizations, that's not viable. You can't do that. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, we need to come up with an exception for this for every single account. No, we just turn them off centrally now. They don't exist. Job done.
Cool. So we like it, but as John has pointed out, it's not news. Old news in the news.
It's like the local newspaper that's struggling to come up with something for local news. It says "Old man falls in pond." Okay,
just a reminder. Yeah.
Because his fence was leaning at 45 degrees.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, on that note, let's move along to our second article for this week. And it is, of course, about AI. We can't have a podcast episode at the moment without talking about AI. And this one is no different. So this is just the announcement recently that Anthropic Claude 3.7 Sonnet is now available in Amazon Bedrock. I don't know what happened to 3.6. Was there a 3.6? Because I know we were using 3.5. And it seemed to just jump straight to 3.7 for some reason. So I'm sure somebody in Anthropic knows the reason why. But yeah, thoughts on this, John? I think we are using 3.5 in our podcast.
The way you're saying 3 dots, not 3 point, bothers me.
Uh-oh.
I've got an American on the podcast with us.
That's true. You have to say
so,
that way.
you know, I
Yes.
was just trying to make him feel welcome and included.
You're code switching, I believe the Americans call it.
Yeah.
I don't have huge amounts of thoughts on this. I don't know where 3.6 went. I don't know. But there was 3.5 version 1 and version 2. So maybe 3.5 version 2 was 3.6. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know what happened there. What I find quite interesting about this, more than the fact that 3.7 is available and it's better, it's smarter, it's this, that, or the other, there's a very interesting change in the numbering sequence that's gone on, because it went Claude 2, right? That was 2. And then they did Claude 3, and then that was broken out into Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus. And then 3.5 came along, and I think that's only Sonnet that has that. And now it's 3.7 Sonnet, but not Haiku or Opus. So it's almost as bad as the USB standards.
I was just thinking USB there. Yeah,
terrible.
3.2 super speed, and yeah.
Yeah, you have to give it a funny handshake to get it to work properly. Like, okay, I don't understand the numbering thing. So yeah, okay, great, wonderful. It now does extended versus standard and extended thinking modes, which is great. And you see that in GPT at the moment, where you'll see I'm sitting and reasoning for 3 or 4 seconds. Cool, we like that. We like it being able to sit and think for a minute rather than just going, here's an answer. Because half the time, if you get your prompting right, it will sit and think for a minute, and then it will give you a much better answer. So we like that. We like that it can do that. I like the capabilities. I don't like the naming convention. I don't like the numbering.
Have you ever thought about trying that yourself, John, thinking a bit before giving an answer? Or?
No, but I'm right so often.
We call that shoot from the hip here in America.
Yeah, exactly. So what are your thoughts on this then, Craig? Are you doing much in the world of Bedrock at the moment?
Yeah, a decent amount.
AI?
So we're some of it on our product and some of it just kind of personal project. I'm glad that this is not just out of US East 1, which is a typical standard. So it's not anywhere international, but it is at least in multiple regions in the US, which is handy for a couple of the clients I work with, that the latency and time it takes to go all the way from them West Coast to East 1 is prohibitive in a lot of there. So I think that's but yeah, I tend to have the same one. It's great to see that they're keeping up, but nothing earth shattering at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. There's quite a lot of models in the marketplace now in Bedrock, I think, isn't there? So I don't know what the number is.
I mean, well, it depends on the region you look at. And this is a bugbear of mine as well, as they're inconsistent between the regions. Yes. And this is also inconsistent because this is available in Virginia, Ohio, and Oregon. So still not anywhere European, still not Latin America, still not, Asia Pac or anywhere those sorts of regions. It's the Americans can have it. Or if you can run your workload in America, then you can have it, which is for what we use, because it's a marketing project that we use these things for. It doesn't matter. It's in the States. I don't care. But if you care about, data sovereignty and all this kind of thing, then sorry, you just can't use it. I mean, that's been a problem for AWS since day dot, right? It'll come to these regions and then those regions and then these regions. And I get that, because rolling services out multi-regionally is hard, because you do have to, in some cases, make physical changes to data centers. And I guess that's easier to do in the States, maybe. It's probably lower regulation, certainly bigger amounts of data centers, and I think a larger customer base for AWS generally in the American regions. But yeah, again, it's one of those things. It's annoying, but I sort of understand it.
The article does state that the new model brings strong improvements in coding. What are your thoughts on AI coding assistance, Craig? Because I'm hearing mixed things, and talk to some developers who think that it's coming on leaps and bounds, and I speak to others who think, garbage in, garbage out still.
No, definitely leaps and bounds for me. So I found limitations in the strict Copilot approach. Like that I've had, very garbage in, garbage out when I've asked for, code examples for improving a particular function. However, if it is a new language that I'm not familiar with, for example, I had to, working with our product at Forward, where I was doing just for fun, just decided to develop a Terraform provider. And I've never programmed in Golang before. And it was really good, kind of helping me with the framework. And I was able to kind of pick it up from there. But yeah, I think there are still some work, although I have heard some of the new models, at least on the code generation, have gotten a lot better. But I'm not quite fully convinced on kind of that code generation Copilot model just yet.
Anything to add on that, John?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a skeptic on these for a while, and I remain to be. I use one in kind of my daily work now because there was a plugin for IntelliJ. It runs locally. It's just an advanced kind of autocomplete, which I find quite useful. I've used autocomplete plugins for donkey's years. Again, things like IntelliJ and VS Code have them for CloudFormation, and they have them for Terraform, and they're amazingly useful because I don't have to remember every single, you need this or that or the other, or here's what the syntax looks like. And it's just kind of more of the same in how I'm kind of using them. The funniest thing, though, about things like Copilot is the easiest way of getting an API key for a service you don't pay for.
Well, on that note, let's move along to our next article.
I'm not recommending you start stealing things, but it will suggest keys for you.
Yes.
They might work.
I think that's one of the concerns that a lot of people share. But anyway, let's ironically, the next article is all about security, but it's not about that particular aspect of security, a different aspect of security. This is an article from the AWS Security blog. The title is 4 Ways to Grant Cross-Account Access in AWS. So, Craig, I know this is something you were keen to speak about. So what are your thoughts on these 4 different ways to grant cross-account access?
Yeah, I thought this was pretty interesting in terms of exactly what is kind of an alias for something else that I didn't know about. There's a couple of examples that mentions, if you trust an entire account, that is like just putting the principal in the account name, that's the same as the root. But if you trust a role and then you remove and re-add the role, that doesn't translate over. Basically, that role is gone. You have to basically reauthorize it again. So for me, I had always kind of, because a lot of the clients I work with, either they have to trust us to do an assumed role or something like that. So it's always been a question on, hey, is it possible to lock things down? Is it possible to only trust the role we're coming from? And it's like, well, this actually was pretty illuminating to me, because it was, I didn't know that you couldn't, if you try to use a condition, that's fine. But if you try to actually trust the role itself, that is ephemeral. And if I, since we refresh roles all the time, that it's going to be. So this was actually pretty enlightening to me, in kind of the best way. I wish it would have done a little more on kind of recommendations. It just kind of like lays out, here's a couple of different ways, but it didn't really give me like here's what we think in terms of like, does it conform to a benchmark or anything like that. It's just kind of laid out the options. So I wish it would have done a little more on that front.
Do you have a preferred recommended option, John, of the 4?
No, it depends on what you need, right? Because they're kind of solving for slightly different things. So lots of these are not necessarily applicable to human access. Some of them are, because it talks about IAM and IAM roles. But if you're still using an IAM role as a human, stop it. I'm going to look directly at the camera and tell you to stop it, because you shouldn't be doing that, right? IAM roles are generally used for services these days. So this isn't necessarily kind of human trusts, and there's ways and means of doing that, the old-fashioned way, things like federated IAM, assume roles, all that kind of thing, which again you can do actually programmatically. If you really need to jump in and run lots of things in that account, you can do an assume role, which is probably the easiest way of doing a lot of that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't have a particular recommendation out of these particular options. It's worth going having a look, because each of them does actually say, you might consider using this method if you need to, and here's a bunch of things that it's kind of applicable for. So they're not necessarily directly comparable. my general advice would be stop doing cross-account things if you can help it at all, because one, it's less secure, and two, it's really hard work. So if you don't need to do it, if there's another way of achieving your goal, do that instead, right? The only kind of notable exception I make for things like that is AMIs. It's if you can avoid copying an AMI into a target account just for the sake of launching it, try and avoid it, because you're doubling up on storage and management and all the rest of it. Sometimes you can't avoid it because of weird encryption and getting auto-scaling to behave nicely with things and all that kind of jazz. But if you can avoid doing cross-account stuff, do try and avoid doing cross-account, because it's a right pain.
Fair enough. On that note, let's move along to our next article for this week. And I think we may have similar comments about this one that we did about the USB naming convention, because this is the announcement that AWS Chatbot is now named Amazon Q Developer. And I did attend reInvent this year, and I did listen to a barrage of announcements about Amazon Q this and Amazon Q that and Amazon Q the other. Amazon Q Developer was already a thing. And now it seems that AWS Chatbot is now been named Amazon Q Developer. So I guess that functionality has just been added to what was already an Amazon Q Developer, unless what was previously called Amazon Q Developer is now called something else. So I'm not sure. I'm kind of
yeah.
This had no point.
No.
This is a marketing exercise. Let's be really brutal here. This is a marketing exercise. So I'm going to try and very hard not to parrot Corey Quinn, because he's said things about this already, and I largely agree with his opinion on this one. It was Chatbot was absolutely great at a very specific set of things, which was giving me stuff in Slack and Teams, if you're that way inclined, but like don't be, giving me state of this thing happened, put it in Slack. And then with a little bit of work, you can hook some Lambdas up to the back of things, so it could call, show me some dashboards, give me some things in chat. And it was really good at reactive chat ops. Brilliant. Why did you need to rename that to Amazon Q Developer when Q Developer is already a thing? Because as you say at reInvent, they announced, what did they announce? Q Developer for helping old ladies cross the road, and Q Developer for doing your shopping, and Q Developer for getting your suit tailored, and this, that, and the other. Like, okay, this feels like a muddying the waters exercise from the marketing department, if I'm really honest, because as far as I can tell, it out of the box, it doesn't do anything different. Yes, there's a bunch of generative AI features, which I suppose that's sort of the point. We're scattergunning the Gen AI all over the shop now. But you have to turn these things on, and it's probably going to get things wrong because it's generative, and that means it's non-deterministic, and that means it hallucinates, and so on and so on. And then again, even if it's not getting things wrong, I don't see it being hugely useful, because it's not going to do the thing where, and this is, I'm pinching this from Corey now, where you say, I've got this alert come from Q Developer. Okay, wonderful. It's telling me about my budgets. Okay, great. Give me a list of all resources that are consuming, more than X amount of money in this region, and it will give me all of them. But it won't poke up and tell me that, oh, by the way, there's one thing running in this region that you didn't ask about that isn't meant to be there. And that's okay. Nothing did that before, but now you get this whole, it's a chatbot, it's Gen AI. I don't buy the point. I don't get the point.
Craig, does it resonate any differently with you?
Well, I mean, not to go on too much of a rant about Q Developer. That exact use case, especially for someone in the networking background, is extremely painful. Like trying to do anything across regions or anything. It's like, oh, well, you could give me the IPs of that thing in the other region. Like, you have that. Why are you making me give that to you? But yeah, no, I've been user of Chatbot for years. We use it whenever a client does an anonymous S3 upload to our repository when they want to do something. So to know, rename it. Okay, fine. I get it. You want to put everything under the same umbrella. The functionality changes are not particularly clear that they're doing. And that worries me quite a lot. If they are, I think to your point, it's a reactive service. I want to know deterministically exactly what's happened. I don't need for this particular a Gen AI flavor, which I'm sure breaks several laws here and in the UK. So yeah, everything has to be AI.
I mean, everything has to be AI. I'm not hating on Q Developer, not by a long shot. I mean, I've been a bit bearish about AI assistants generally. I have used it a bit. It produces reasonable quality cloud formation when I can't be bothered to write it myself, which is all the time. So I don't hate it by any measure, but it's the I can't not swear. I'm going to quote a chap called Rory Sutherland, who you might have heard of in the UK. He's coined a term called N-shitification, which is just making everything worse. And AI, frankly, is N-shitification because it's now everything is. We're an AI company. We're this. We're that. I think was it Zoom that did this as well? It's now you have an AI avatar. I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want this. I just want my chat thing to tell me that I'm spending money I shouldn't be. I don't need all the LLM nonsense.
Well, there we go. I mean, the AI certification is going to be a tough one, just simply from remembering all the product names that exist in that space. Yeah, because there are a lot of them, and good luck
I'm
if they
hoping
haven't
beyond
changed
hope.
between when you
Hoping
studied
beyond
it.
hope that they haven't moved into the solutions architect world yet, because.
Yeah, well, we'll have to wait and see when the certifications catch up. But yeah, Amazon Q is going to be an interesting one just to try and find your way around that portfolio because
I mean, they're reasonably sensibly named, to be fair. Q Developer for, I don't know, VMware migrations or whatever it's called. You can tell what that's for.
Sure.
They're reasonably sensibly named. Q Developer for don't do this thing. Okay.
Yeah, it was more just the sheer number of them, but yeah.
Yeah, there's like 30 of them now, isn't there? It's mad.
I don't know. I've lost count. I've never actually attempted to count, but yeah, I know there are many. There are many, but progress, as I say, it's can only be a good thing. So yeah, but ripe for consolidation at some point, I'm sure. Anyway, on that note, let's move along to our final article for this week. And I knew we were going to be talking about databases at some point. Not directly about databases, but this is an article from the AWS Big Data blog where AWS has been named in yet another Gartner Magic Quadrant as a leader. This is the Gartner Magic Quadrant for data integration tools. I've got it here on my screen, and AWS firmly in the leader quadrant. Well, I say firmly, sort of just in the leader quadrant, with big players like Informatica, Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, Google, etc. But obviously, data integration is a space that they are moving more and more into with all the various zero ETL integrations that keep getting announced and so on and so forth. So, yeah, Craig, what are your thoughts on this? First of all, are you a fan of the Gartner Magic Quadrant?
So having worked with Gartner for many years, and understandably they are forced. Like, I believe this is a fairly new category. I think 2023 was data integration's first year, and that's pretty on par for Gartner in that they're being pushed more and more to create more and more magic contracts. Now to their point, to their benefit, looking at this particular one, they do have many players in the field, which is what they kind of require. Do customers like them? To some extent, yeah. Where they put things, like I generally am in agreement with where they put things in the quadrant. Like they have, I think in this one, about 15 different players. How they rank the innovators and laggards and where they're putting them in the contract is a bit of black magic on their part. But yeah, I have my own issues with. I don't disagree with the placement of the quadrant, but I would like some more. Maybe this requires a $50,000 Gartner subscription to actually figure out where their logic is coming into, why they are more to the left than to the right.
You mean they're not just throwing darts at it on a wall?
It does feel this way. Yeah, I mean, maybe they got the triple 20 here at the, so yeah.
Nobody got the bullseye on this particular quadrant. So. John, your thoughts on this one?
I'm trying to work out who would be double 16. It would be C data, probably, down the bottom there. I've been watching too much darts lately. Yeah, I mean, I've used this word a lot. I'm quite bearish about magic quadrants generally. I'm something of a skeptic on them. They always feel a bit kind of finger in the wind territory. I wonder how much of it again is a marketing exercise. I'm fairly sure Gartner hasn't been bought to put these people in these places because I'd like to think they're a stand-up organization, genuine analysts, and all this kind of thing, and they're doing the legwork. So let's work on the assumption that they've done this honestly, and it's not a marketing exercise. It's okay, wonderful. AWS is still actually not as good as you might like them to be. I'd really like to see the leaders category kind of subdivided a bit more, because you can be just barely in the leaders, and then your marketing team and your PR team would go woo and set off their Apple reactions, if I can get it to go, to say that like, it's party time, we're in the leaders category. Yeah, just barely, mate. Like, okay, fair play, you're halfway up the axis on the ability to execute, but your completeness of vision is you're just about in it. So, okay, they're a leader, just barely. And I'd like to see that category subdivided a little bit more. I know that's kind of deck chairs on the Titanic, because you've made the criteria for being, good enough that if you have this weird kind of criteria for your purchasing department that we will only use leaders from the Gartner Magic Quadrant for this, that, or the other, then fine, okay. I still don't really understand the point of the Magic Quadrant, but then I'm an engineer. I'm not an analyst. I'm not a sales guy. I don't like. What's the point?
I think you hit it on the there's many organizations out there that won't even, if you look at the slope, they won't even consider it if there's not a Magic Quadrant. And then the second stage, they won't if you're not a leader, which, as we've seen, the criteria is a bit opaque, then you're not considered there. So it's a necessary evil, but I definitely have my own issues. They are a stand-up organization. They're pay to play, but they are, there's nothing untoward about them. But they're a necessary evil that we deal with.
I guess it just answers the question of why on earth would I use AWS for that? Surely AWS is a cloud provider. They're not a data integration tool provider. Well, yes, they are. According to the analysts, they're now up there with.
It's quite interesting how close that AWS are to Google on this one, because if you'd have thought, I want to do big data, I want to move lots of data around, I want to do lots of analytics, you think BigQuery, you think GA4, you think those sorts of things. You don't necessarily think AWS off the bat, and they're quite close to each other on this one. And I couldn't, and I don't live in this world, but I couldn't for the life of me name a single Microsoft tool outside of Power BI that you'd probably use for this.
I'm sure they have them, but
I'm sure they are, but
not our world. So yeah. But anyway, on that note, we have reached the end of our time for season 4, episode 9 of Logicast. So all that remains is for me to thank you guys for your insights. Thank you, John, as always, for sharing your insights on this week's AWS news. And thank you very much, Craig, for joining us to share your insights as well. It's been great to have you along as our guest. If you've enjoyed the podcast, we are available to download from wherever you get your podcasts. So please like us, recommend us to anyone else you think might be interested. If you want to see John's Apple reactions and him pointing his finger at the camera, we are also available on the Logicata YouTube channel. So check that out, like it, subscribe, etc. That's all we have time for this week for season 4, episode 9. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of Logicast for you. Until then, thanks for listening. See you again next time.